Improbability, illogicality, and absolute absurdity might be the very first thoughts that come to mind when examining the events that supposedly happened in Louisiana at the end of the 19th century. Any sane and reasonably skeptical person would question the validity of the many paranormal phenomena that allegedly transpired in the deep parts of the bayous. However, among all of the claims, myths, and legends to surface from within Louisiana, a single tale would stand out among the rest as potentially the most preposterous of them all. 2 years prior to the cataclysmic and sudden increase of paranormal activity within Louisiana in 1895, a man by the name of Ariel Denoy moved to the city of New Orleans. Denoy was a peculiar man with an even more peculiar profession, donning a poorly crafted glass eye cast by the man himself. The eccentric newcomer inspired both awe and surprise in the New Orleans residents, as he announced in the local papers that he, as a taxidermist, could not only provide the people with a way to keep their beloved pets in this world indefinitely, but that he would also open up exhibitions within his quarters, displaying the proud work of other taxidermists as well. While the initial receptions of Denoy and his exhibition seemed to be positive, with a rather large attendance enjoying the work of others and more experienced taxidermists, the attitude and the local population's perception of Mr. Denoy himself would change as they were gradually introduced to his own work. Appearing to be far more inexperienced than most of his peers, Denoy struggled to make his creation seem lifelike and failed to capture the essence of the animal he was trying to preserve, remarking himself that one of his customers fainted as he proudly presented her with his work on her recently deceased pet. Denoy himself remarking that his biggest weakness in taxidermy was the recreation of the animal's eyes, where he had an unlucky tendency to make the animals look possessed and demonic. As his reputation within the neighborhood slowly declined, the old saying, "Misery loves company," would soon ring true. For deep within the bayous outside of New Orleans, a terrifying sickness was ravaging the local population. This disease of unknown origin would slowly crawl through the swamps of Louisiana, infecting person after person with a wild fever of insanity that caused an outbreak of unprecedented death and violence. And it wouldn't take long before the dreadful shadow of this outbreak would reach the doorstep of New Orleans. With his closest neighbor, a woman by the name of Mrs. Florence Frank, taking an immediate dislike to him. Tensions were already problematic for Denoy, but upon realizing that one of her children, who spent an awful lot of time at Denoy's place, admiring his collection of taxidermied animals, had caught the fever and spread the cough to the rest of her children, Mrs. Florence was suddenly certain that this ungodly man, who perverted God's very own creations, were the sole reason that this fever had been cursed upon mankind to begin with. And with that narrative, it didn't take much convincing from Mrs. Florence for the whole of the neighborhood to rise up and chase Denoy out of town. Forced away from his house and workshop, shunned by his customers and the people of New Orleans, Denoy found himself wandering the Stillwater Bayou, riddled with anger and resentment. How dared they treat him like this? He was an artist. His creations weren't sick and twisted. They were beautiful, an ode to the fragility of life, a moment of history preserved indefinitely. Amid his anger and frustration, Denoy happened to stumble across a slaughterhouse within the bayous. The place, though riddled with swine hanging from large meat hooks, seemed to have been abandoned for quite a while, and with all the leftover tools, as well as the location being somewhat hidden, Denoy thought it could be a great temporary place to continue his work. However, with nowhere to buy food, he would now have to hunt for his supper himself. And this is where his life would change radically. On one of his first walks within the Stillwater Bayou, looking for small game to hunt, Denoy came across something odd. His eyes failed to comprehend whatever it was he was looking at. In front of him was a giant body of something. Well over 6 feet tall, definitely over 350 pounds, missing an arm, a head, and with leeches embedded into his shoulder. The skin of the entity was like an elephant's, pale and gray, but also thick and tough. Denoy stood dumbfounded, staring at the huge corpse in front of him. Having had a deeply rooted interest in animals his entire life, he was astonished not to recognize this behemoth of a creature. Not animal, definitely not human. This was something else. However, it didn't take long before Denoy's concern and unease was replaced with a curious optimism, and the longer he stared at the large sack of meat in front of him, the more opportunities and possibilities found their way into his head. This thing could make him a fortune. With a long rope and a wagon, through a great ordeal of effort and struggle, Denoy managed to transport the massive creature back to his makeshift office, where he immediately went to work on it. Seeing that the creature had neither head nor eyes, Denoy rejoiced as the creation of the clay cast, as well as the removal of the skin, even for a creature of this size, would be significantly easier than even that of the smallest dog. The knife sliced through the tough skin from top to bottom, exposing the creature's intestines, piquing the curiosity of the taxidermist as he recognized neither shape nor substance of any of the internal organs. He noted that the leeches on the creature's shoulder had a tough carapace, making them very easy to form casts to as well. But what made Denoy happiest about his new discovery was the lack of eyes, his one and only weakness. Inspired and motivated, driven by the recognition he would get from presenting a creature like this to the rest of the world, Denoy worked tirelessly through the entire day and the entire night. As the sun would set and the moon take its place, the darkness that followed seemed to change the swarms around him. For within the deepest parts of the bayous, Denoy would hear the most ungodly things throughout the night. Growls, yells, and painful screams. However, he was determined not to let anything disturb his work, and managed to remove the skin as best as he could by the early morning. As a final touch, he did what he had done with all of his products, and applied his own special coating to the surface of the skin. While Denoy might not have been the best taxidermist in terms of removing skin or recreating lifelike eyes, his particular method and formula for preserving the condition of his work was second to none. The protective coating was practically invisible to the naked eye, but provided outstanding protection against deterioration. Having now completed the first task, all he had to do was wait for the skin to dry. In the meantime, Denoy ventured back into New Orleans, fancying a drink after all of his hard work. However, in the short time span he had been gone from the city, the disease spreading throughout Louisiana had worsened severely. People no longer called it a fever, but referred to it as the plague, with corpses littering the streets piled up at random. Denoy shook and quickly returned to his temporary workshop, certain that nothing good would come from lingering in the city. Arming himself with nothing but patience, 6 days later, with the coating and skin finally dry, Denoy was ready to apply it to the clay armature he had crafted. He forced the creature into an upright position, propped up with copper wires spooled around it to make it stand, as well as wooden impalements throughout the body, and a large meat hook to add to the theatricality. It had to look scary. After all, it was a monster. As his last touch on the creature, he wrapped his large apron around the body, not just to cover up the massive scar on the belly that he had caused when curiously examining the intestines, but also to make sure that the skin would set and stay perfectly on the amateur. Finally, after many days' work and patient waiting, the behemoth stood ready, the fierce monster ever so terrifying. However, Denoy felt like something was missing, like the creature was incomplete. There was something about a monster with no head that simply seemed unsettling. On a whim, Denoy decided to remove the head of one of the swines within the slaughterhouse and attached it on top of the creature to complete the picture. He marveled at his creation. It was perfect. Now, all he had to do was to get people to come and see it. But that night, a violent storm approached the bayous, and when it hit Stillwater, the forces of the rain, wind, and thunder caused the already fragile roof of the Noy's sleeping quarters to cave in and collapse. With nowhere else to rest for the night, Denoy was forced to sleep next to his creation in the workshop, hoping that the violent thunder wouldn't keep him awake throughout the night. But that would prove to be the least of his concerns. Under the howling wind whistling through the workshop and the heavy rain pounding against the roof above him, a violent bolt of lightning shot down through the dark clouds. The bolt shattered wood and timber as it tore through the ceiling, striking the meat hook of the monster that essentially worked as a lightning rod. The electrical current from the bolt of lightning, amplified by the spools of copper wire around the creature's body, sent electricity flowing through the clay and dead tissue. Shocked and terrified by the blast of thunder, Denoy stumbled to his feet, seeing the giant behemoth engulfed in a terrifying blaze of smoke and hellfire. As the flames died down, quelled by the seeping rain pouring in through the hole in the ceiling, speechless and horrified, Denoy carefully approached the monster, which seemed to be almost The body of Denoy would be discovered by a group of fishermen within the Stillwater Bayou more than a week later, his corpse so mangled and mutilated that the only usable piece of evidence to recognize and determine his identity was the glass eye of his own creation, still left in what remained of his skull. However, one final piece of Denoy's legacy would reveal itself in October later that year. For when the Great Fire of 1895 ravaged through the city of New Orleans, Denoy's house, the same he had abandoned that very year, would among many others fall victim to the roaring flames. But when the fire subsided and the firefighters began sifting through the debris within the wreckage, a large collection of Denoy's taxidermied pets was discovered, each and every one of them completely unscathed by the fire, preserved indefinitely by his ingenious protective coating, a formula that unfortunately seems to have died with him. Hey there, Hazmat here. That concludes the story about the butcher, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I apologize if the quality of the script and narration suffered a bit this time around, as I've been sick as a dog through the entire production of this video. As always, a big thanks goes out to the Hunters Lounge on Patreon, specifically Jim and L. Bob, Corey Peterson, Derivative, Ryan, Goose, Doc Powell, Hambone, Dominic Carlos, Ape Benavides, Ghosty, Jane Doe, Jose Gonzalez, Kashi Yuka, Nebula, Nightingale Far, Riz TV, Sir Bottoms, Stas Biestek, The Loaf of Bread, Tim Wright, Tom Hengst, and Ulf Jelström. The Hunters Lounge does not only support me as a content creator, they also help me decide on future content, and you can join it for as little as $1 a month. Link is in the description below. I'd also like to give a big shout out to both Tip and Rexley from the Hunt Showdown Discord for being a real couple of cowboy bros. And as always, thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.